Hello. Welcome to the Data Trenches. My name is Anna, and I'm from Snowflake. Today, we're going to start your day off with some real talk. Is your boss asking you for an AI strategy on an entirely unreasonable timeline? This is the session for you. Maybe you're a data developer, and you're just trying to cut through all of the noise around AI. This is also the session for you. Today, we're going to talk about 3 things. 1, if you are what you eat, then your model is what your model ingests. Are you feeding it well? How can you tell? 2, what happens when your AI actually starts writing code? How do you even collaborate with a CoPilot? And 3, you've done all this work. You've built an amazing data mart for your analytics. Now you got to make it work for AI. What do? Joining me in the trenches today are 3 amazing humans who have already walked this path and can tell you exactly where the dragons are. To my left, Katie Bauer. Katie's a seasoned data leader and modern data stack pundit extraordinaire. She has quite a few years on us building ML and now AI-powered applications, first at Reddit, then Twitter, and now most recently at GlossGenius. Followed by Kasia Sitkiewicz, product manager at Github, working on developer productivity. She's been working on things like GitHub Copilot for the last almost 6 years. And finally, last but not least, the very great Holden Karau, who you probably know from several O'Reilly books on your shelf. Books on Apache Spark, serverless Python, and Kubeflow ML. Today, Holden's at Netflix, but she's also working on using AI to help you write your insurance appeals. So let's hunker down. Katie, why don't you start us off? Why is it that building AI applications is particularly challenging at GlossGenius as compared to, say, Reddit or Twitter?
Yeah, it's a great question, and fundamentally it comes from what the business is. GlossGenius is a vertical SaaS platform for beauty and wellness businesses, and it's really oriented around in-person services. There are aspects of that job that are digitized, like the calendaring and managing of appointments, but a lot of other aspects of that job are not. And anything can be data, potentially, but you have to have a plan for making it become data. So for in-person services, you really have to think. You have to have a strategy for collecting the right data and making sure that you have enough of it and enough examples that you can actually have the patterns that an ML or an AI application would recognize. And it's a hard thing to evaluate. If you think about something like calendaring, what is the metric for a good calendar? There are a lot of different aspects of it that make it hard to say this one was good. Like, are you maximizing the profitability of the day? Mm-hmm. Are you maximizing the ability of the professional to get something done that they need to do? Are you maximizing their ability to take a break because a day was very hard? Mm-hmm. There are a lot of different ways to think about it, and knowing what they are looking for is also something that's really hard about building a product like that for someone who is not sort of the knowledge worker that a lot of business-oriented AI products are built for right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can just imagine you're in a beauty shop. You've got a lot of things going on. How do you digitize all of those important operations to make sure that you're feeding them into your data?
Yeah, I mean, you have to really think about what are the things that they want to have off of their plate. Because the services for them, a lot of them, it's their artistry. Mm-hmm. It's the thing that they really see as who they are and the thing that they would not want to give up. Mm-hmm. So it's a matter of finding the things that are a part of their business and are essential that can be tracked and captured somehow and then used to actually improve their businesses and make their lives easier. So it does tend to be sort of administrative things, but mm-hmm. the needs are sort of different. In that particular case. And there are lots of ways that it can go, things that we haven't necessarily got into yet, but aspects of, say, managing your inventory, mm-hmm. How that gets used across different services, that's a thing that can potentially be digitized, mm-hmm. but you have to build an app that encourages people to do the behaviors that allow you to capture the data.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. So what you're saying is, you don't actually want to replace the things that people enjoy about their jobs. Mm-hmm. You want to augment it.
Yes.
And you want to make it super easy for them to give you the data that you need in order to do that.
Yes, exactly.
So, Holden, I know that you've probably faced a similar problem when thinking about the healthcare space, because I can imagine training a model on healthcare data is really hard because really strong data protection. So, data availability is pretty sparse. How have you solved this problem?
Yeah, totally. So the data availability is super sparse, especially when you're say an indie person, like kind of doing it near garage, which is sort of where I'm at in the healthcare space. I don't work in healthcare normally, as you can maybe tell. But so there's things that you can do. You find pieces of data which are like proxies of the pieces that you're interested in. And then you can try and say like, hey, I've got this thing which is pretty close to what I want. How would I define a transformation from this other thing back to the thing that I actually care about? And so in the space that I'm working in, it's trying to generate health insurance appeals to when you get denials. And so there's third level data, which is anonymized, available at the state level, about what the state has decided about appeals that make it all the way to the state. And it's going back from like sort of these final decisions to say like, what would have the inputs looked like to something that ended up like this? So you can actually use other models to create anonymized data that is good for training using other anonymized data. And then, of course, you still need some human evaluators in the loop eventually. Otherwise, like it's going to just be garbage in, garbage out. But you can find proxies of the things that you're interested in that maybe don't have the toxic personal information in it that you really don't want to touch if you absolutely can avoid it.
Yeah. And how do you think about evaluating the success of something like this? How much are you optimizing for examples that are successful versus examples that are not?
Totally. So in this case, actually, I immediately throw out all of the data where the state said no, or not completely throw it out, but like those are not positive examples to train on. It is still useful data because you can say like, hey, this is not actually treated as medically necessary for this, and you can encode that information. But you wouldn't necessarily want to use the bad examples, right? You want to focus on the good examples. But you can still use reinforcement learning to try and say like, okay, these were the successful appeals, these were the unsuccessful appeals. Like, how do we make sure that we generate things that are more closely linked to the successful cases?
That's so cool. Thank you for sharing. Okay. So let's switch gears just real quick from building AI products to using them. Kasia, GitHub was very early in user-facing AI with Copilot, and I know it's been just about 3 years since the release, and that's really impressive given that was pre-LLM boom. What have you learned about AI-augmented work?
Yes, definitely there is a lot of learnings. I could probably have an entire session on that. But the biggest actually learning is that developers should treat AI application as another developer, not as an automation. In regular pair programming, right? I think the biggest value is when we provide a lot of context, a lot of like background on the project, on the problem, and just like we would do it with developers. So I think a lot of developers see very successful outputs when actually they treat AI application or a system or Copilot as another developer who just asks regular questions to get them up to speed, right? And provide more accurate response. We also started seeing a lot of positive feedback from like newer developers who are either new to the project or haven't been working on the project for a while, and they want to get up to speed. So by working with Copilot, not only they save time on like learning about documentation and repo and code base, but at the same time, just like that experience is more enjoyable and more they are more in the flow and more happier because that barrier to entry is very low at this point. And last but not least, I think a lot of developers enjoy using Copilot because it saved them a lot of time, and especially on PR reviews, those smaller ones. And also help them to have Copilot as the first line of defense, meaning that they just like, hey, before they present the code or their work to someone, they ask CoPilot, and if CoPilot doesn't give any feedback, means that it's ready to go. So it's actually like that's the experience that our developers love and enjoy. And again, we see a lot of different feedback coming from different type of developers with the different tenures and length on the project or with the company, right? So the overall feedback is positive, and majority of the developers on GitHub are using Copilot, which is very promising.
That's super cool. So it sounds like folks really enjoy using it as like more of a rubber duck. And it's also really exciting to hear that the onboarding to a new, maybe complex code base is something that can be, dramatically simplified for developers. One thing I want to double click on with you is you mentioned kind of developers who are getting started or are new to the code base or maybe getting started programming in general. And one of the things I think about as a data professional is the role of something like Copilot in data workflows. There's so many people in data organizations or in the periphery of data organizations who could benefit a lot from just a little bit of code so that they can have this richness of data available to them. So what have you seen in kind of different experiences between kind of pro developers and folks who are just getting started and the role of copilots for them?
So just to highlight that Python is #1 programming language on GitHub right now, which means that more and more data people coming into GitHub and they try to work on their work on the application. So congrats to all Python developers. We love to see you there. So when you're coming as a new programmer, right? Like it's very important to, again, try to treat AI system as another developer, ask questions, and it really helps them to get up to speed and build that confidence in terms of like what they need to work on and like what are the problems, what are like the automations that they need to do, like write unit tests and also write the documentation. I think it's very important also to utilize Copilot to help write documentation on what is shipped, and especially when you're using AI systems and applications. So another developer who comes into the project, they understand what happened. So definitely, I think utilizing AI systems for these type of tasks. And again, acquiring knowledge, right? Right now, it's so quick, so fast to acquire a new knowledge versus like before, maybe reading your book with like a month or two to finish it.
But you should still buy several copies.
Absolutely.
Put them under your pillow, sleep on it. It's a fantastic way to learn.
Yeah, so definitely acquiring, digesting knowledge is way much faster with the AI systems and applications. So definitely a better, overall the developer workflows are improving and they're becoming more AI native. So I think that we will see more AI native applications in the developer workflows.
Yeah, amazing. And speaking of that, Katie, back to you. As a data leader, how have you thought about rolling out self-service analytics augmented by AI?
Yeah, it's definitely something that feels a little bit scary when you're running an analytics team. The idea of turning an AI loose to some random person who doesn't necessarily have the ability to check it. So, for example, metrics need to be defined very consistently, and there are often different versions of metrics that are subtly different for different departments. And if an AI goes and retrieves it for you, maybe it grabs the wrong one because it doesn't know who you are. It's a scary thing to roll out to your organization. But the early way that we've been starting to think about it is using copilots. And to your point, it's been a thing that's been very helpful for people who are maybe less comfortable writing Python. Like there are so many different models and libraries that actually calling the model or building the model, the code itself is pretty boilerplate. And if you know conceptually what needs to happen, it's very easy to get it from an AI and not have to memorize the syntax or know the APIs of the models, which is great. And that's been a really good way to build it out so far. But something that I think I would really like to see, and something that's been on my mind a lot recently when it comes to self-serve analytics, is the idea of push versus pull. And I feel that that's probably a pretty good application for a Gen AI, is to figure out how to push things to people, especially because you hear about RAG, it's basically a recommender system. And thinking about how to do that, like it's a unique problem with analytics in particular, because there's so many different constraints in terms of like, what do you need to surface? There's a personalization aspect, there's a timeliness aspect, and I don't know who will solve it, but whoever does, I would be very excited to use that.
Yeah. Well, I hope the Snowflake product team is taking notes. In all seriousness, though, I think that what you say here about push and pull is really interesting, because we've kind of left a world that was really good at recommender systems. Like, we know how to do that.
Yeah.
And now we have incredibly powerful tools that can really level up what we're doing there. And so I'd be excited to see who does that first.
Yeah.
Amazing. So, Katie, one of the things that you mentioned that I want to underscore is that rolling out self-serve analytics is only useful when you already have really good data defined, when you have metrics that are really crisp and you have a really great idea of how your data is laid out. Holden, I want to bring this back to you now and kind of think about this a little bit more. So most of your kind of gold standard or well-modeled data in your warehouse is designed for analytics workloads. Is that okay? What needs to change in our data stack or even on data teams to make it easier to use analytics data marts for AI?
Yeah, so I think this is a great question. And so it's answering more like sort of from my day job perspective, because we have way more data. So we've done a lot of things to try and sort of reduce our storage costs, and that's historically been a very smart idea. But now we're looking at cases where it's like we want all of the data. We don't just want like the last week's data, right? And so a lot of these things that we've maybe done around sort of storage tiering, I'm not saying that they're bad, but like we have to sort of reevaluate them and say like, okay, do we actually want to do tiered storage here, or do we really want to be able to query this full data set? And then also the other thing is like, we tend to be more okay with slower access times, right? So because we're sort of training on these large batches of data, it's okay if it takes us longer to read all of the data, provided that like once we've started doing the reading, the rate is fairly consistent, because you really want to be able to sort of like feed the models at a consistent rate. And it's when it starts to get chalky that you're wasting expensive hardware.
Yeah.
And so, it's a bit of a different world. But I think, you don't have to go and re-architect everything, right? Like things are generally okay, but it's time to like maybe reevaluate a few of the decisions that you've made probably in your data warehouse.
Yeah. So maybe let's talk about one of them, or at least one that I imagine might be applicable here. I think when you talk about consistent input and consistent amount of data that goes into your model training process, I think about data partitions and the fact that they are partitioned logically based on, I don't know, date or something. And I know that data is not that neat, and it's not always regularly distributed across those partitions. So any advice?
Yeah, I mean, so data skew is, I don't want to say it's the bane of my existence, because it's certainly been part of how I've continued to be employed for all these years. I think if humans were normally distributed, the world would be a lot less fun, and also we'd have a lot less interesting data problems. But like, if you have your data organized by geographic distribution, right, like that can make sense for doing certain kinds of queries. But if you're trying to do like large batch model training, you probably don't want the situation where you've got like a giant partition of all of the people that live in New York. You didn't want that in the analytic use case either. But there were maybe times when it was more reasonable to get that. And so I think partitioning is like this really fun problem, right? Like it's the kind of fun where there's type 1 and type 2 fun, right? There's this fun that is fun while you're doing it. And there's the fun where you're like, wow, that hurt a lot. But like, I'm really glad that I like went mountain biking, even though at the time it was super painful. And I think, partitioning is maybe more of the like in retrospect fun kind of experience. And so I think there is no necessarily like one true silver bullet for how we should partition our data, unfortunately. On the plus side, you should definitely buy several copies of all of my books. They don't have the answer inside of them either, but you can spend several days looking for it. But yeah, so it's a frequent pattern that I see us doing is sort of like repartitioning our data that has been historically stored for analytics use cases, and then it's like, okay, so we're gonna still load our data from this, and we're still gonna store it in the analytics use case because that's sort of our most important one, because people still cost a lot of money, right? And that's fantastic. People should cost a lot of money. Capitalism, I have views. You can probably guess what they are. But people should cost money, and we should try and do things so people aren't waiting. And it's okay that the computers have to wait a little bit. And so the fact that we're going to optimize for people and then do some things to make it a little bit better for the machine, sort of in the secondary case, is okay. So the repartitioning slows things down, but it does give us sort of like a more consistent experience once we've started processing the data. So there's like this additional startup overhead almost in a way. But then you have your data nicely distributed for the actual model training that you want to do.
Amazing. You had me at, we don't have to throw everything out and start over. So I think that's a very useful insight.
Yeah. Although if you want to, it's your money. You can light it on fire however you wish.
Well, thank you for that. That was wonderful. Kasia, I want to bring it back to you and maybe see if you have any words of wisdom for folks who are developing and actually building AI augmented features today.
Yeah, so I guess very important is to focus on the user problem versus the data or like the systems that you're choosing. Solve a particular problem, experiment, ask for feedback, iterate, and see what is the output and reflection, right? Create a feedback loop. Make sure users and your customers can actually provide the feedback very early on, and even to the system, right? It's nice to say corrected, hey, that's actually not what I expected or is wrong. So make sure you support those things. I know people talk about responsible AI, and what helped us to get a lot of enterprise customers was we shipped this page where we explain how we build it, is a trust center, a CoPilot trust center with all of the FAQs. So that's very important. And I noticed that people actually don't pay attention to those things. So they have to, every time when someone calls you, it's hey, it's on the website. Yeah. You can check it, right? So we can eliminate that. And last but not least, I think make sure you create that AI fluency with your team, right? Because it takes time to do right prompts and ask right questions. So just make sure you share the knowledge and feedback with your peers and the team members and also organization, so that you can continue building the right product and that is tailored towards your users, and it's more human-centered.
Amazing. So remember, you're solving a problem and not just playing with some code.
Yes.
Yeah. Write things down and show your work.
Correct.
Yeah, that's great. Katie, what about data developers looking to start just, adopting some of the things that, you and Holden have been talking about? Any advice for them?
Yeah, I mean, probably the best piece of advice I have is to start small and manage expectations. A lot of people think that you can build an AI project or an ML project very quickly, and it very often takes much longer than you think. You're going to have to experiment. It's going to do things that you don't expect it to. And in general, you might have gotten it wrong a little bit, and you need to be prepared for that process.
Amazing. Holden, what about you? Any advice for our budding developers?
Yeah. So I'm reminded of a story where ostensibly a U.S. congressman asked Admiral Grace Hopper if they gave the computers the wrong information to start with, if they would still get the right answers out in the end. And we all laugh at this because to us it's very silly, but I think it's good to remember that the things that are super obvious to us are maybe not obvious to all of our partners and stakeholders. So take the time to really set expectations correctly, because otherwise you get a lot of very sad people. And when the people who are sad are the ones signing your check, that is not a good day. I have been there before, and my resume is always up to date.
Well, there you have it, folks. Straight from the trenches, from three incredible experts. A few things we learned today. Number one, it turns out the data that you have in your data warehouse is probably already good enough for a lot of the things that you're trying to do. Yes, you could spend a little bit of additional effort, and it's likely going to involve things that you already know how to do as well. But it's really good to make sure that your data is organized, and it's really good to make sure that it's cleanly labeled before you start plugging it into your AI applications. And if you've heard some creative ways today of generating data, if you found like you don't actually have enough. And finally, when you're developing products and actually using creating augmented AI workflows, think about the end problem that you're trying to solve. Document your work, and build trust with the people that you're building things for. So there you have it. For the rest of today, you're going to have lots of great sessions that are going to dig into some of these topics and a lot more. Thank you for joining us. My name was Anna.